Welcome, and thanks for joining us. My guest today is Michael St. Cross, the Vice President, DoD and IC at Optiv ClearShark. Michael, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
While we're talking about identity and access management in the federal government, what's the current state of that?
Well, it's a pretty broad topic. A lot of focus has been on what we call ICAM, or Identity, Credential, and Access Management. And that's mainly regulatory driven, really more of a compliance initiative that goes all the way back to Sarbanes-Oxley being applied to the federal government back in early 2000. And I think we're kind of in that third generation of technology, moving into the fourth. So problems that are being solved today, or have, I think, been sufficiently solved across most of the .gov landscape, even .mil or IC, really is the governance of identity, who's authorized to be on the network, and how we're adding them, how we're modifying them, how we're removing them as well. So those processes are in place. That's a pretty regulated market area, and if you look at the spend in the space between software technology, infrastructure, consulting, it's probably $1 billion market.
Wow.
Within that ICAM space, you also have this concept of authentication authorization. Multi-factor authentication has been a big push that came out really in the Biden executive order in 2021. So a lot of that investment has been made, it has been implemented. There was a great amount of support from DHS, from CISA, in providing some support to get those technologies quickly adopted. And then within that, in addition to that authentication authorization, coming from a technology area that's called IDP, Identity Providers. So that, just provides a single point to authenticate who's getting access, and then granting the authorization of what systems they have access to. Now within that, you have a subset of something called privilege access management, which really puts control around the administrator roles, not only in the directories that are centrally managed, but also within applications, within services. And finally, there's a concept of having a master user record, because identity lives in many locations, not just industry standard technologies like LDAP or Active Directory, but it's also in databases. It's in legacy custom applications. So there's many places to aggregate that into, and then establish a central view of who that identity is, and where they can actually be enabled, to have authorized access, essentially. So that's a pretty broad topic, and there's a lot of investment there. The challenge that we see is, we're not having news stories about people not being in compliance. We're really having news stories about, agencies being breached, not only from, nation states, but also malicious actors internally, and the longer term threats of malicious insiders that may be nation state sponsored. And that's where identity is pivoting into security, right? Identity security is really the gap space I think we're all investing in and exercising new technologies to eliminate the gap that is being exploited today. And we could talk more about that as we progress the conversation today, but there's a lot to uncover there, because you have, in the organization, you have the CIO organization that's been the traditional custodian of identity. Identity is typically associated with network services, with applications. It really hasn't lived underneath what we now have as chief information security officers. And they, by and large, are first and foremost frontline security operations about what's happening on the network, on the perimeter, what incidents are occurring, what threat hunting is actively occurring, but they don't necessarily own identity. So as an attacker, as an adversary, I've got a blank administration zone to pivot through that doesn't have centralized control. And that's really the state of identity as it's running on systems.
You mentioned organizations like DHS and CISA, where we would think that they would be very focused on identity management. Do you see different levels of capability and adoption across the scale of federal agencies? Are some better at it than others?
I just think it's who's had the big problem most recently. That definitely is, getting the application of the new technologies that can prevent some of these more dynamic exploits of what really is cache privilege. Now, if you look at the MITRE attack model, you have this progression of the tactics, techniques, and procedures to get a foothold on a system and progress that to having control of the system and then moving laterally. So, attack technique area category 6 is privilege escalation. And you can't be successful without escalating privilege. You could be on a system, but if you can't get to the crown jewels of the organization, you can't compromise the confidentiality of their data. You can't potentially compromise the integrity of their data, which could be poisoning AI, large learning language models. There's just a lot of things that could happen once you have privilege. Typically, you want to live on the land, hide in the shadows, go undetected, get the information you're looking for, perhaps compromise the data that you have control over, or even just deny access to it like ransomware attackers do. Not very effective in the government, but generally pretty big commercially. So I would say the agencies that are advancing have had more problems in that area, I would say, first and foremost. And then beyond that, you do have more strategic thinkers and planners that are justifying investment to get more of that identity security focus in their identity programs overall.
So necessity really becomes the mother of invention and progress.
Yes, I also think the Zero Trust Initiative, whether it's DHS, Office of the President sponsored, or DoD with Randy Resnick, the Zero Trust pillar, number one, is identity. So there's a host of controls that need to be implemented. And some of the maturity and the phases of rolling out Zero Trust Identity, we have kind of a phase 1, 2, and 3 set of requirements. They do begin to address some of these higher risk threats of privilege compromise with the appropriate controls, like endpoint privilege management is a big area to see progress in.
So what are some of the things that CISOs are asking for the most help in as they try to solve these problems?
So I would say nobody wants to buy, their grandfather's identity, which really could be ICAM. You could categorize it that way. They're really looking to the future. Where is this going? They're modernizing. They're transforming to cloud. So cloud identity, security around service level processes in the cloud is a big focus. Because ultimately, we maybe won't be using data centers that we own for all of our services. It'll be all cloud-based. But today we operate in a hybrid environment of still having an on-premise centralized repository, but now I've got identity into the different cloud providers, or maybe I have an IDP provider that centralizes that, but it's still multi-cloud focused. And then I also have software as a service applications that have their own unique repositories that are being managed, but they're still integrated to my enterprise. So I think the biggest thing that any leader, CIO, CISO, CTO, they want visibility. What is my identity attack surface? And then from there, do I have it under management, or what do I need to be doing to get full control of that?
So an effective identity management system, describe that for me. Like if a CISO gets all of the things that they want and they would say, my system is tight, what does it look like?
Yeah, well, it's not an easy job. You've got to, be on top of the regulatory requirements and the mandates. At the same time, you've got to be on top of what's being, exploited by the attackers. And it still is two different problems to solve. So prioritizing investment that gives you the, biggest return on the control that you're implementing, I think, is where the focus needs to be. So there's a bridge of identity security and where privilege is living on endpoints. There's this notion of cache privilege that most of if you read a Mandiant report or any threat intelligence, the attackers are still using the same tools they've been using for 15, 20 years to gain the same footholds on systems. And they really are dumping password caches, application caches, to get what's living in memory. It's currently authorized, and I compromise that credential to start moving around and begin to elevate, the access that I have. So maybe I do get a domain admin credential. Maybe I do get a service account that doesn't change, but once a year. So now I've got a credential that gives me privilege that I can use for a year and move around. Getting to that point of effectiveness, to having visibility and governance over what's in cache, or maybe even getting the concept of eliminating all standing privilege so it's on demand and can't be exploited.
So does that mean that you really want to focus your access management on certain positions more than others? Are there priority credentials that you want to protect?
Definitely. I think we do a good job of auditing what's traditionally called the domain admin sessions. That is a table stakes item today, to have a recording, keystroke logging, just complete visibility of what people are doing with privilege. But then you have situations where there's 2,000 applications and they really shouldn't be having human activity within them, but who's auditing that? I think that's still a huge blind spot, that zero-day exploits are being used to gain access to servers that have those applications with embedded passwords that haven't modernized into more on-demand credentialing for services, for that machine-to-machine interaction.
Well, that seems like a great place to take our first break. My guest today is Michael St. Cross, the Vice President, DoD and IC at Optiv ClearShark, and we'll be right back. Welcome back. My guest today is Michael St. Cross, the Vice President, DoD and IC at Optiv ClearShark. So Michael, we were just wrapping up with talking about identity management and protection about certain credentials, but right now, I can only imagine how challenging the identity management issue is in agencies where people are coming off the rolls, coming back on the rolls, maybe coming off the rolls. What is the identity management risk in this particular moment? Talk to us about what the challenges are.
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge is having the assurance that if somebody has left the agency, that all of their access really is deprovisioned. Now, the investments in technologies that do what's called identity governance and administration, that really automates the mover, leaver, joiner process. That leaver process is probably the most critical thing that has to be proven effective. And as we work with different customers, there are still challenges there. Maybe they don't have everything underneath that process. But with folks leaving, most likely in involuntary situations, you still have the risk of disgruntled former employees that may do malicious things on the way out, or set some traps as they leave to come back and have access. So the leaking of data, just exposure of risk to the organization, potential even recruitment for malicious insider activity using previous access. Those are all things that are, I think, top of mind right now. So making sure that the accesses and accounts that they've had are just fully eliminated is the big thing to be focused on. The other thing, though, is a lot of the people that are doing this work are also being impacted.
Right.
We're seeing people that are 30, 40-year government veterans, whether it's through combined civil service or military service, or the totality of that. They're opting out. They're raising their hand to leave the building. So the experience drain is definitely happening. There's not enough humans to supervise the processes. And that's always been a constraint of not having enough budget and people to go execute process change. And here we do have a gap in coverage, and then a potential poisoned ex-employee base that could cause some issues.
We were talking so much about the technology solutions, but here it really is people. I'm imagining fewer people in the CISO shop managing identity. there's fewer people in the HR shop who can actually tell the CISO shop who's coming and going. So how should agencies think about mitigating some of the risks that you've just talked about?
Well, I do think having a full implementation of this mover, leaver, joiner process is essential to have automation, so it's not so human dependent. If there's one place that says, Mike St. Cross is no longer an employee here, and everything that I had access to is deprovisioned and validated, that's where we need to be. I think that's the biggest impact any organization can have today is with that type of full visibility and full process automation.
Well, mentioning automation, is this a place where AI can be used? I mean, we can't have a conversation about technology without saying AI. How does AI fit into identity management now?
Well, I think one of the more interesting scenarios I'm seeing with our current customers is we are looking at insider threat with AI around identity. And you have to correlate a very large volume of data on not only what's happening on the network with technologies that are in the network detection and response category, but also what's happening in the identity provider services, like who's getting access, who's getting authorized, what's happening with the privilege access management solutions, who's getting privilege, what's happening with their sessions, but also what's happening on the endpoints. And that endpoint logging is just a massive volume of data that normally doesn't get as analyzed as it should because it's just expensive to do. So we're using AI to pick out the pieces of critical data to build specific scenarios, to look for anomalous behavior of what shouldn't be happening. So AI is really effectively, stitching together the elements of just suspicious activity. Whether we get a baseline of what's normal and then a baseline of the abnormalities that are happening, particularly when it comes to privilege and privilege escalation. So we're seeing a lot of effective application, through various technologies that are approaching it maybe from the identity level with more of an identity security analytic, or others that are approaching it from that network layer. But you still have to pull in all the elements to get that holistic view of the activity, because right now that is the another blind spot that's being exploited.
Can you give us an example of an organization that's really done AI incorporation well in this space?
I would say it's probably in a classified area.
So you can't tell us the specific agency. Can you tell us maybe some lessons learned from the process?
I think just surprises on where these anomalous behaviors are happening. Because the government just has a huge contractor base, and there's connectivity now for collaboration across all communities. So there's another agency, military department. They're really on the same network. They're sharing information, but they have 20 different contractor elements in there. So there's a lot of risk on who's really on this network and what are they attempting to do. Why are they attempting to access something that isn't normally something they should be going to? And then how are they going about that? So anomalies like that are surfacing that we haven't had visibility to before.
So that's really interesting. It seems like for the first part of this conversation, we were really thinking inside an agency's boundary, but the cross-agency, multi-domain environment presents even extra risks.
It does, and getting a handle on that is a problem that AI, I think, helps us solve much more effectively, but also, efficiently and just at a higher rate of detection. I mean, that's really what we're looking for is what is a true abnormality that does need, the due diligence of exposure.
So as we're thinking about what people are needing to do now, what about for the future? How do they meet the present moment but be attuned to the new both opportunities and risks that are coming?
Yeah, I think it's the forward thinking of I don't want to be where I am today. I don't want to just buy the upgrade of the legacy technology. I want to look at like future state. So getting into a cloud environment or even a hybrid environment where Privilege is granted dynamically and it's deprovisioned dynamically. So we have this concept of zero standing privilege is the one thing that really rules them all. If you have this control in place, you will eliminate the privilege escalation pathway, or you'll make it very, very, very hard. Zero trust, does focus on both process and human level, or human and non-human identity, and how we provide more granular privilege control to really eliminate that possibility. Concepts of microsegmentation, of not having a flat network. If you get in at one place, you're everywhere. Now you've got many layers, north, south, east, west, across, to use this privilege that you've compromised. We're just making it harder for the adversary to advance, because today they have too many easy paths to do that.
Is there a balance between making it harder for the adversary and eliminating functionality of the system for people who have to do their work?
No, I think the concept of on-demand entitlement is it's maturing in the market. The technologies that deliver that are available. Maybe not FedRAMP and IL whatever certified, but they're there, and we're helping our clients bring that into their environments with the right certifications and controls. But it's definitely possible to do even today. Just getting that ready for wide government adoption is the focus.
So what's your best advice for people who are trying to navigate identity management and access management today?
Definitely put some investment and justification into this control of endpoint privilege management. I think it's the most effective investment that can be made today. And then really double down on visibility, whether it's through AI or just making sure you've got full implementation of your automation process. I mean, those are three things I think that will transform the security posture of any agency and keep us out of the news.
Staying out of the news is an important place to be, right?
Exactly.
Well, that seems like a good place to wrap it up. Michael St. Cross, the Vice President, DoD and IC at Optiv ClearShark, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, thank you. It was a pleasure.
I'm Terry Gerton, the host of the Federal Drive on Federal Insights, sponsored by Optiv ClearShark on Federal News Network.